Okay, my phone died. I apologize. When I went to move it, it hit the side button there, and it turned off. So I'll do two parts. This is probably a two-part video anyway. So we were on confirmation. No, we were on attitude polarization. So group polarization, and I was only going to do the overview because you could really go into a lot of detail on attitude polarization, especially when you're talking about individual Scientologists. Some of you may have questions about particular celebrities, and you know, their behavior and stuff. I could give you some insight into some of those. The ones that I knew personally from Scientology was Juliette Lewis. I met Beck only once, and Jason Lee, Macaulay Culkin's first wife, Rachel Miner, Lindsay Bartleson, who was on Grounded for Life, Marcus Coloma, who was in Beverly Hills Cop, Beverly Hills Chihuahua, and probably some others that I'm not even remembering or thinking about. Celebrities never really tickled my fancy. I was a stage manager in Nashville for a year, so it's I've actually forgotten celebrities that I've met. So the overview is that group polarization is an important phenomenon in social psychology, and is observable in many social contexts. For example, a group of women who hold moderately feminist views tend to demonstrate heightened pro-feminism beliefs following group discussion. Similarly, have shown that after deliberating together, mock jury members often decided on punitive damage awards that were either larger or smaller than the amount any individual juror had favored prior to deliberation. The studies indicated that when the jurors favored a relatively low reward, discussion would lead to an even more lenient result, while if the jury was inclined to impose a stiff penalty, discussion would make it even harsher. Moreover, in recent years, the internet and online social media have also presented opportunities to observe group polarization and compile new research. This is what I want to research. Psychologists have found that social media outlets such as Facebook and Twitter demonstrate that group polarization can occur even when a group is not physically together, as long as the group of individuals begins with the same fundamental opinion on the topic and a consistent dialogue is kept going. Group polarization can occur. President Trump, perfect example. The group polarization was occurring through social media. No one thought he was going to win. The polls weren't showing him winning all the way up until the very, very end. But that effect of group polarization is very, very powerful. And so attitudes and attitude polarization is very powerful. Your attitude is very, very powerful in your life and in others. Just your own singular attitude can affect the attitude of many others. Of course, there's, like it said, a lot of other factors, but that's what I'm not going into. Those are the things that you could get really complicated, talking about individual attitudes and how, say, one group, a family, say, just one family of 3 or 4 people or 5 people, the attitudes of each one of those family members will affect the entire family, and discussions about particular things that they have beliefs in can lead to extremely positive, like I was saying, extremely punitive or extremely lenient situations or attitude or judgments. And it all relates back to bias and deductive reasoning and apophenia and all this stuff. So back to confirmation bias, the attitude polarization. All right. When a disagreement becomes more extreme, even though the different parties are exposed to the same evidence, that's what that's when the polarization occurs. So, belief perseverance, when beliefs persist after the evidence is shown for them to be false. Belief perseverance. So, even if someone shows you that's incorrect, you still believe that it's true. I have a guy. There's a guy I know who believes the Earth is flat, and it doesn't matter what you say. The Earth is flat. He'll find something online and show you. Look, it's flat. The moon landings were fake, etc. That's belief perseverance. The irrational primacy effect, which is a greater reliance on information encountered earlier in a series, which is essentially the first thing. An example of the primacy effect would be if I showed you a series of numbers. Do you think you would remember the first set of numbers, or the second set of numbers, or the third set of numbers? Well, you're going to remember the first set. That's the primacy effect. So the same thing works with beliefs, unfortunately. Raise your kids right. Honestly, the main inspiration for me wanting to become a social cyber psychologist is for kids, for children. I've been in the workforce and I've seen some major problems, and I've been in the school system as a teacher and I've seen some major problems. And it's like the technology that we haven't, it's been unleashed, and it's caused social phenomena that aren't necessarily bad, but can lead to behaviors that are just completely unpredictable in a wide variation, in such a way that it does affect work, the workforce in general. And there's tons of papers you can read online about how crappy millennials are, and how crappy Generation X is, or whatever, or in the opposite, how great they are. But I believe that what they call the millennials, like there's a small period of time between the Generation X and the millennials where there's a generation there that isn't either one. You can see it in the surveys and stuff that are done from anyone born from 1978 to 1985. It's like a micro demographic of a generation. There's a name for them. I forget what they call them, Xennials or something. So, belief perseverance. Boy, we are going into some deep shit. We're about to. The irrational primacy effect. You're going to believe something. You're going to believe the first thing, or you're going to remember the first thing, that you're shown. Which is incredibly important when you're talking about Scientology, because the first actions that you do in Scientology will define whether or not you stick around, really. And that's due to the primacy effect. The illusory correlation, when people falsely perceive an association between two events or situations. Perfect example at a Scientology event at the Shrine Auditorium would be the balance of theta and in theta. All right, these are two concepts that are presented in Scientology as basically good and evil. And they talk about this illusory concept or correlations. They will say, we have finally tipped the scales. There's more theta than in theta, or we need to tip the scales because there's more in theta than there is theta. So give us your money. And when something happens to you, it's always your fault. Like, this is illusory correlation. So you pulled it in. They call that pulling it in Scientology. So if I break my leg, I pulled that in because of some sin that I committed. They don't call it sins, they call it overts. An overt action that you knew that was wrong. My nose is just sinuses. I'm not doing cocaine, I promise. I'm on caffeine. So, and then confirmation bias goes on to talk about experiments. So I'm going to stop right there and talk about Scientology and all the things that I spoke about. The confirmation bias encompasses a lot, as you can tell if you've watched this far. So, I can't really say that confirmation bias is the only factor that you're dealing with in Scientology. You're dealing with all the other things that I talked about as well. And the link is for all these things I've gone over is in the 4 years later I want to be a cyber psych video. Kaiva Go is the highlighted comment, and there's a bunch of links that I'm going through to talk about how they relate to Scientology. You can follow that and with this video if you want to keep up with everything. So the biggest issue that you see, or that I saw, was at these events. You know, I was never a good Scientologist. I was always in ethics, constantly in trouble. Occasionally was upstat, but most of the time was in lower conditions. There's maybe, out of the 2 years that I was on staff, a total of 3 to 4 weeks where I was upstat, and that's 104 weeks. So very small percentage of time. After you leave the cult, that perseverance of belief perseverance. This is why people say it takes a long time to recover from a cult, because even though you leave and you know that group was just nothing but evil, there are beliefs that persist, and over time, as you get back into your real life and reality, you'll test, or at least I did, you'll test the beliefs, because you still have the beliefs, but you're in a foreign world because you were living in cult world, and now you're living in the WOG world. Ding! And when you're living in the WOG world and you still have the beliefs of Scientology, you actually see Scientology happening all around you, just like you did when you were in. Except over time, you start, the rational part of your, assuming you're around people who have never been in, people who love you, people who care about you, people that knew you before. There are environmental factors involved, is what I'm saying, in my recovery from the perseverance of the beliefs, because I didn't even look, or even when I thought about looking online at some of the negative Scientology material that I'd been told about, I would feel guilty for thinking about it. But over time, I tested, the ethics conditions. I did doubt conditions on everything. I built an online guild. Let me tell you something. This is a really funny story. My wife and I were married. It wasn't long after that I realized she wasn't very social. I'm in a band. I'm a musician. I've always been in bands, and I've been a musician since I was a kid. My grandfather gave me. I remember my grandfather taught me how to play the guitar, and I've always been in bands. So a lot of social. I'm a very social person. When you play a gig and stuff, you know, people want to talk to you, and then there's a social aspect of the band itself. After my wife and I were married, we would go to shows, or she would come to shows. But when I would get on stage, she was just, and even before I got on stage, she would either be right by my side, being completely quiet, or she'd be off in a corner or at a table by herself, looking real nervous and anxious. And if I gave her my credit card to go drink, there were a couple nights where she drank. I mean, and she was a skinny girl, very tall, and she drank. She would drink 6 to 8 beers in 30 minutes to try and relax herself, but she ended up getting sick. So the after that happened a few times, and I had to literally carry her into the car and carry her home and all that. I lost some desire. I lost some of my desire to be as social as I used to be. But I still was in bands. I just show up for the gig, play the gig, go home to my wife. And speaking of the biases, a lot of people think that musicians cheat on their wives all the time. I can tell you that it's just like the black guy with the baggy pants. It's that's a bias, you know. That's a stereotype. I never cheated on my wife when I was on the road, and I was on the road a lot. I still love my ex-wife. We have 2 beautiful children. Of course, if you've seen some of my previous videos, you might know that there was a lot of conflict in our divorce, but our children are okay now. So I will love her forever till the day I die, and I'll only ever have one wife. That's just going to be, you know, maybe knock on wood, but she gave me children, and I'm forever grateful for that, to her for that. So the story goes, I needed a way to socialize. I needed a way to connect with people. Early in my life, my friend started playing World of Warcraft, an online MMO, massively multiplayer online game. He disappeared. I never saw him again. I mean, I have seen him in recent years, but I mean, he disappeared and just played WoW for 6-7 years. And I didn't like the idea of that. To me, it was like, why not just like be social with people, you know, or play a game with someone. If you want to play a game by yourself or with someone else, but for God's sake, don't forsake your whole social network just for a game. Well, I didn't have an opportunity, or I felt like I didn't have the opportunity to develop my marriage and myself and my wife in a way socially that would work for her because of her anxiety. And so I didn't want to play an MMO, but I knew that there were social connections there to be made. I found out about a game called Fallen Earth, and I ended up playing it. And I used Scientology principles. This is where I tested my. This is where I did a majority of my testing of my beliefs, because the belief perseverance was occurring. I would use Scientology premises and principles inside a virtual world. In this virtual world, Fallen Earth, you can Google it. It's a post-apocalyptic, massive multiplayer online game. The objective is to control and maintain resources, and it's an apocalyptic wasteland, kind of like Mad Max. When I got to the highest level that you could get to, there was a giant clan, guild, whatever you want to call them, called Fist of the Empire, and they dominated the entire server. You could not go into any PvP zone where all the good stuff was and not get murdered your face off. So I started sneaking into these PvP zones to get resources. I happened to find some of the most valuable resources in the game, and then I started producing armor for sale, and it was the top tier armor you could get at the time. There were no negative penalties to the armor, whereas other armors did have negative penalties. Long story short, I hated that guild because they were just oppressive. They wanted to, if they didn't kill you, they wanted to take all your money, and some people gave them all their money in the game. I hated this guild. I thought it was just horrible, you know? Bad enough that it's post-apocalyptic, but now you got like Mad Max villains roll around. Of course, I guess they're role-playing that a little bit. But I vowed to destroy that group, and what I ended up doing was selling them the armor, and then they were wondering, where's all this armor coming from? Because we can't find the materials. I was able to find the materials in the land that they owned that they couldn't even find because they were so focused on killing people that none of them ever had time or looked around their large, huge pieces of land modeled after the parts of New Mexico to find the like titanium or anything valuable. So I ended up paying rent to make them in the entire Fist of the Empire fighting force. They're in all of their armor, and they used an old army designation system, and I was part of the logistics team after a while because I was making money hand over fist and they didn't know it, no pun intended, and they wanted me in the guild just as a financial resource and a logistical resource. So there were certain materials that they needed that they couldn't find anywhere, and I knew where to find them. I managed to, and I was a horrible PvPer, I didn't know anything about it, so I learned from their operations division how to fight. And once I got good at that, I got really good at that. More so leading, not so much fighting, but I was able to corral people in a certain direction with the things that I learned in Scientology, using methods that, that I don't truly understand, which is part of why I'm studying psychology. Some of the methods that I know to use in sales or manipulation, I don't really understand. I just know how to do them. I was trained to do them. So I sabotaged this entire group, and they fell apart. I destroyed this clan in that game. They still exist in other games, but in that game, I was able to completely eradicate that scourge from the server, and that's all I wanted to do. But what happened is, after they were gone, some of the people who had a fucking brain, who were tired of being, because Fist of the Empire was like a cult in a game. You did not question authority at all. No questioning authority. If someone said you do something, you do something. Now, this may seem crazy to you because it's in a video game. This whole concept and this whole conversation may just seem completely foreign. But it happens in games. So what I'm saying is that Fist of the Empire in Fallen Earth was kind of a cult. And there's blind obedience to authority. And whenever the authority collapsed and left, there were people who were still playing the game who reached out to me and were like, hey, what are you doing? Because the whole thing, no one knew that I caused this, because I did it using dirty tricks, using fair game, using organizational executive technology, all the shit that's in Scientology. This was my testing ground for the beliefs that I had. And I can tell you that, yes, you can destroy something or someone or an organization with precepts in some of the material in Scientology. That should be clear because it's been done. You know, people get harangued all the time and harassed, and in the policy itself says they can be destroyed with no punishment, and that is exactly what I did. And I was not punished. In fact, I was rewarded, because after the Fist of the Empire dissolved, I got all of the best PvPers, the best players in the game at that time on my side. And from that, I built, along with them, I used Scientology with the organizational executive technology. I had all my OECs sitting right by my computer. I would use references. Now I never quoted anything. I never told anybody in the guild that I was doing that. I told them I was a Scientologist. One of the rules, the number one rule of the guild, was no religious bigotry, because I felt like people, like, there were a couple times when I said I was a Scientologist, and they were just like, are you fucking stupid? Now I realize, like, yeah, that was totally correct. But at the time, I was extremely offended by it, and I would just kick a person out. Like, look, man, I'm not going to give you shit for being a Jewish person or Catholic person or whatever. Like, you're this religious hatred and bigotry, that's gone. No one's going to be doing that in this guild. Judge not, lest ye be judged, and I still believe that. So, confirmation bias. I know I've kind of derailed a little bit, but actually, when talking about cyber psychology, this is a very interesting thing, and it continues to go on. I led that guild as a guild leader with that title for 8 years, close to 8 years. The name of the guild changed 2 or 3 times. But what's amazing is that I still play with these guys today online. We're a community of gamers from all over the world. Germany, Latvia, Spain, Italy, Greece, West Coast, anywhere in North America, Canada, South Africa. We've been so big at times where we had people to cover every single time zone when we played EVE Online. And I find it fascinating because you get to meet people from all kind of different cultures. And there's a core group of people that are still playing together, and I still play with them. And they're some of my favorite people to talk to. I wish I could meet all of them in real life. I've met some of them in real life, and they're every bit as much of my friend as I would expect them to be, which is fascinating, considering we've never met. But the ones that I did meet were exactly how I expected, because we had spent years talking to each other and playing together. So I would say that that belief perseverance is probably the core issue here in confirmation bias, because the more that belief persists, the more you're going to have these illusory concepts in your mind, or bias, you know, and that's my video response to Kaiva Go. I have to split it up into two parts, but Kaiva, I'm going to keep going until I get through that list. And this has been the most exhaustive one yet, because it's two videos. One's 30 minutes and one's around 20 minutes. So I hope you enjoy it. And if you're a gamer and you want to play with some cool guys, I'm the only ex-Scientologist in the group, just so you know. So there are plenty of other cool people in the guild or the group, because we're kind of not a guild anymore. We're just a group now that plays together. Most of us are in our 30s, and we're still competitive gamers, and we still love to play hardcore. And when I say hardcore, I mean sitting in a chair for 4 to 8 hours. I'm becoming more of an advocate of getting up and walking around, and I've been encouraging everyone in the guild to do that. We haven't lost anyone yet to any major illness, but we have a few members that have heart conditions or disabilities that I worry about, and I try to encourage people to get up, move around, get some exercise, take a break every hour, and that's asking a lot from some of us, because we're so hardcore. Like when you sit down and you're grinding, that's another aspect I'd really like to study in psychology, is motivation for games. Like what makes a person sit down in a chair for 36 hours like I used to do in Fallen Earth. For me, it was the preconditioning or the classical conditioning that I had in Scientology, where I had an objective and I'm going to push it to a done. That's what they call it, I need you to push this to a done. Well, my goal was to destroy Fist of the Empire, and I made sure that I was online at all times for all people when I was in Fist of the Empire, so that I could create trust with the people in Fist and use that trust to destroy the group through various means. I appreciate you guys watching. I appreciate the subscriptions. I appreciate you keeping up with me. I love all the support. As I said in an earlier video, there was a time when you guys were my only support, and that's no joke. Not even my own mother and father were believing what I was telling them. They had no idea that any of this went on in Scientology. They thought I was okay and happy. So when I talked about it, it was horrible timing, because I was changing. My wife couldn't handle it.